Well, today's message and the Isaiah reading for today reminds me of a story from when I was at school, which I wanted to share with you. It seems like a long time ago for me now, but I remember that when I was in high school, every Friday lunchtime, a Christian band would come into the school, Springwood State High School, and they'd play in this outdoor amphitheatre in the middle of the school. And I even remember it was near D Block. Anyway, this band would spend the entire lunch hour playing Christian music and giving, a teenage appropriate, inspiring message that talked about the challenges of teenage life. And to be honest, most of the people that sat in that amphitheatre would come to heckle the Jesus loving fools. And me, who was a very new Christian at the time, would sit at the back of the amphitheatre, trying my best to be invisible to my peers and listen along to the messages. I remember that this one lunchtime, the kids were on fire, they were shouting out insults and the band did their thing and they kept doing their thing. And when the bell rang, everyone got up, started making their way back to class, and the band kept playing. And they played a song that I'd begun to learn in church, and I stayed. And as everyone left, I felt compelled to do the actions for this song. In this act of solidarity of sorts. For a young person who spent a disproportionate amount of time trying to fly under the radar and blend in, this was completely out of character for me. In that moment, I swallowed my fears and I danced. And I danced from the start to the finish of the song, while all my peers ran off to their classes with sideways glances at the weirdo dancing. That was me. I remember, though, that as I danced, I stopped caring what people thought. My fears, while they were still present to me, weren't dictating my behaviour. I was just simply caught up in this moment. And it felt like a moment of surrender and commitment to God, who I was getting to know and who was becoming my closest companion. I felt the Spirit of God with me and nothing else seemed to matter in that moment. And when the song was over, I kind of just picked up my bag and headed off to class, a little bit shocked at what I had just done. That memory has stayed with me as a formational moment. I was terrified of what everyone would think of me. I was terrified they'd know I was a Christian and just as terrified of people seeing me dance. And yet, as I danced along and did my thing, caught up in this moment with God, the fear stopped becoming paralyzing. It was still there, but instead, what was almost paralyzing to me had become liberating. Dancing despite fears because of who God is and what has been promised. And we hear in the book of Isaiah today, twice really. We hear from Isaiah. We hear in Isaiah 43, and then again, John the Baptist speaks and quotes Isaiah in the Gospel of Luke. As a young radical Christian at the time who accepted no compromise and who was determined to change the world, I loved the book of Isaiah. I loved the prophetic imagery, the clear sense of call and purpose. Here I am, Lord, send me. And I loved the promises of God that you find in the book of Isaiah, promises of justice for everyone. And here in Isaiah 43, as you can see on your screen, we hear and we read these promises. Fear not, I have redeemed you. I've called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. When you walk through the fire, you'll not be burnt. Does anyone else start singing that 80s church hymn? Fear not, for I am with you. I do, as we hear these words. But the words ring true. Do not fear. I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are my child. It is this powerful claim that is made by God upon the life of everyone that would dare to take the leap of trust and wade out into the waters of faith. Isaiah's words above remind us of this claim. You belong to the Creator of everything. You have been called by name, purchased for a price, and you do not need to be afraid. I have to remind myself that these powerful words were not a balm given to comfortable Christians in the late 80s. The people who Isaiah was addressing at the time had more to be worried about than some public embarrassment for dancing. Instead, these words brought comfort to a broken people in exile so many years ago. People who were ravaged by war, displaced from the familiarity of their homes and their livelihoods, people who were longing for a return to the normal that they'd known before their homes were destroyed, before their jobs became irrelevant, before they lost family members. Longing to find again that equilibrium that comes when belief and cultural practices that are built up over many, many generations kind of intertwine together. Practices that were so intricately woven into the experience of the land that they lived on that they now found themselves isolated from. It's nothing at all like, well, 21st century Australia, is it? I can't help but compare the exile of the Israelites with our COVID pandemic. We're meeting online via Zoom today for the safety and the protection of ourselves and each other. We're required to adapt once again, to step away from our normal place of worship, which holds within its walls generations of faithfulness and faith-filled practices and stories. Peter and his family are isolating. Workplaces have been disrupted. Parents of young children are hit by the double whammy of kids who can't be vaccinated, but equally childcare centres that don't have enough staff to fully care for those kids. Supermarket shelves are empty. We went yesterday to buy toilet paper, couldn't find any anywhere. And it's not because there's not enough toilet paper to go around, it's because there's not enough healthy staff to stock them. Retirement living is back in lockdown and affected by staff shortages. And we're hearing that the start of school might be delayed a few weeks to just get over the peak of COVID that is approaching us. There is a lot of anxiety in the air, as I imagine there was when the Israelites lived in this foreign land. And it's into this tumultuous, uncertain set of circumstances that God shouts to us, "Do not be afraid, for I have claimed you as my own, you belong to me." And it's into that wild place that John the Baptist also comes, quoting from Isaiah, "A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight paths. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain shall be made low." As an aside, another song that pops into my head. Do you remember that "Comfort, comfort all my people"? I know we sing it at church sometimes. Isaiah 40 begins with those words, "Comfort, comfort all my people," and my mind instantly jumps to that hymn. "Speak tenderly to my people, all your sins are taken away." In my memory of the song, we only sang the first two verses, which you can see part of in front of you. We were at this conservative evangelical uniting church when I first heard it as a new Christian. It said things like, "Though your tears be rivers running, though your eyes see only darkness." But then there's this extra verse that was written by Robin Mann, which Peter will put up for you now, in 1988. And he wrote it as a part of the Christmas Bowl appeal, which is now called Act for Peace. But these words were probably too political to actually sing in church. I don't remember ever having sung them. "Though we build strong walls for prisons, though we feast while others starve, though we fill this world with weapons, comfort, comfort." And then the last verse commences with, "Though we fracture God's creation." I wonder if Robin Mann's original lyrics actually better capture the prophetic intent of Isaiah and of John the Baptist. The promises of God don't mean that we won't suffer, that there won't be any problems, that our plans will always work out. The promises of God don't absolve us of the need to work towards justice, to act out of love, or to proclaim the inbreaking of God's kingdom. And neither are those promises some kind of bargain with God, blessing for us if we believe, but only if we believe. But sometimes. Some of you have probably had the privilege of meeting my daughter, Renee. She's been around, especially over Christmas this year or last year. God willing, or should I say COVID willing, she'll be moving to Toowoomba in just a few short weeks to study. I have to be honest, I'm not okay with this at the moment, but hopefully I will be. But I do love the person she is growing into. She recently attended a worship service where the preacher promised that if people just put Jesus in the center of their life, everything would be okay. If you just make sure that Jesus was always the one you were serving, that Jesus was king, then everything will work out for you. But after the service, my daughter was distressed and she wanted to critique that message with me. She wanted to analyze it. She wasn't satisfied with the simplicity of the message. She wasn't satisfied with a version of the story that ignores the people of God also being in exile, like they are in Isaiah, also living as refugees, also under Roman occupation and a corrupt puppet king, like they are in the New Testament. There is no perfect comfort in this world, not even for those who proclaim Jesus as king. But neither should we expect that. The baptism of Jesus marks the commencement of his ministry, but it also points us towards the cross, to Jesus' suffering, to Jesus' death. And it's this that we're baptized into. In Mark's gospel, we have the skies rent open at his baptism, and we hear the account of the temple curtain rent at his death. And Jesus, just having been baptized, looks up into the heavens, which have been rent asunder, and he hears the voice of God proclaiming his identity, that he belongs to God. Jesus is claimed by God. This is my son who I am pleased with. And how similar is that promise that we find in Isaiah 43? Don't be afraid. I've redeemed you. I've summoned you by name. You are mine. Jesus in this moment doesn't then ascend to some heavenly place. No, he remains firmly planted in muddy waters, still a member of a subject people in an occupied land, surrounded by refugees and sickness and poverty. The call of God in his baptism and the call of God on us doesn't excuse us from the troubles of today. Instead, these promises of God compel us into the struggle of our place and time in history. God calls us by name, but it's not a call that takes all our cares away. It's a call instead that makes us care more deeply. We're not sitting back waiting for justice to roll on in. We're not relaxing on our porches waiting for God to somehow make the paths straight. No, we are God's beloved. We are God's own kin. We are the ones who are called to prepare the way. We are the ones who are asked to help make the paths straight. God doesn't take our cares away. God calls us to care more deeply. God calls us in this time and place to see where justice needs to be done and to spend our time and even vote for those outcomes. It's not the promise of a perfect world. It's the promise of purpose in a broken world. When we pass through the waters, God who knows us and calls us is with us, but we still pass through the waters. And just as the Spirit of God descended on Jesus, as he was baptized in the Jordan, we are given the gift of the great Comforter, the very Spirit of God's self, to lead us, to shape us, and to help us in this task. The Spirit of God claiming and naming and shaping us, and more and more and more into a people for whom struggle and challenge becomes just another opportunity to lean in, just another opportunity to find joy in the midst of our fears. Because the God who was and who is and who always will be belongs to us. And we are called God's own King. How good is that? That is a cause to dance. Let us pray. Holy God, thank you for your grace that always goes before us, always makes a way. We thank you that you are claiming us as your own. We thank you that even in the midst of challenge and distress, the knowledge that we are yours and you are with us can cause us to dance and to rejoice. Would you help us to make straight paths? Would you help us to show care and kindness to our neighbour, despite our own fears? Would you help us to seek justice for the other, despite our anxieties? We throw ourselves wholeheartedly on you today, Lord. Amen.